The morning my boss cut my salary, he didn't even look uncomfortable. He sat at the head of the glass conference table, fingers folded, posture rehearsed, as if he were delivering news about the weather instead of dismantling my life. The email had arrived at 7:42 a.m., marked mandatory meeting, no context, no explanation. By 8:15, I was seated across from him with HR dialed in on a muted video call, their cameras off, their silence louder than words. "We're restructuring compensation," he said calmly. "Your salary is being adjusted from $112,000 to $41,000. I actually smiled, because my brain refused to accept the sentence as real. "You mean temporarily," I said. "Or you're talking about a role change?" He shook his head. "Effective immediately." The word immediately echoed in my ears. Rent. Student loans. Medical bills I was still paying off from last year. I opened my mouth to argue, but he raised a hand, already bored. "This isn't a discussion," he added. "You're still employed. You should be grateful." Grateful. For what? For surviving while barely breathing? For being allowed to stay in a building where I had spent nights sleeping under my desk, debugging code that kept the company alive during its most fragile years? I wanted to scream, to list every system I had built, every emergency I had solved when no one else could. Instead, I nodded slowly, because I'd learned long ago that reacting emotionally in rooms like this only made things worse. When the meeting ended, he stood up first. "Oh," he said casually, hand on the door. "We'll need you to sign the revised contract by Friday." I returned to my desk in a fog. People typed. Phones rang. Coffee machines hissed. The world continued as if nothing had happened, while my entire future had just been quietly rewritten. I stared at my monitor, but the code blurred. What he didn't know, what no one in that office knew, was that the number he'd just slashed wasn't my worth. It was only the number he thought defined me. 3 years earlier, before the company's open floor plan and motivational posters, before my boss had learned how to say leverage without flinching, I had been hired as a junior developer on a short-term contract. No equity. No promises. Just a vague line about growth opportunities. Back then, the company was bleeding users, its flagship product unstable and vulnerable. I saw the flaws immediately, not just in the code, but in the concept. I didn't say anything at first. I fixed what I could, quietly, after hours, because that's how I was raised: prove your value before you announce it. One night, while everyone else had gone home, I stayed behind and rewrote a core process that handled data synchronization. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Better than anything they'd built before. The next morning, the system didn't crash for the first time in months. My boss took credit in the all-hands meeting. I didn't correct him. I told myself it was fine. I was learning. I was building something. Over time, my responsibilities grew without my title changing. I designed safeguards. I documented vulnerabilities. I proposed improvements that were ignored until they failed publicly, at which point my fixes were suddenly aligned with leadership's vision. I watched executives cycle through, each one more polished than the last, each one less interested in the details that actually kept the company alive. Still, I stayed. I believed in the work. And somewhere along the way, I stopped believing in the people. The idea came to me during a system outage at 2 a.m. A flaw no one else had noticed, buried deep in the architecture, something that couldn't be patched without a fundamental redesign. As I worked through it, exhausted but focused, I realized the solution I was building wasn't just a fix. It was something entirely new. A method. A framework. Something that didn't exist yet. I didn't tell anyone. I finished the emergency repair, sent the update, and went home as the sun was rising. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened a blank document and started writing, not code, but descriptions. Diagrams. Use cases. Over the next few months, in stolen hours and quiet weekends, I refined the concept. I tested it independently. I documented everything. And then, after consulting a lawyer I could barely afford, I filed a provisional patent. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it out of survival. Because I'd learned the hard way that companies don't protect people. They protect assets. And if I was going to keep giving everything I had, I needed to make sure something protected me. Back in the present, my boss walked past my desk without acknowledging me. He was laughing with a director, confident, relaxed. To him, the salary cut was a strategic move. A way to remind me of my place. To ensure compliance. What he didn't realize was that by reducing my value to a number on a spreadsheet, he had finally pushed me past the point of loyalty. That afternoon, HR sent the revised contract. The language was cold, clinical, full of clauses about confidentiality and ownership. I read every word carefully. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer with a single line, "We need to talk." By Thursday night, I had my answer. I didn't need to quit. I didn't need to threaten. I just needed to be patient. Friday morning arrived quietly. I dressed carefully, not in defiance, but in calm. I printed one document and slid it into a plain folder. When I walked into my boss's office, he barely looked up. "Have you signed?" he asked. "Almost," I said, taking a seat. "There's just one thing you should see first." I placed the folder on the table between us. He frowned slightly, irritation flickering across his face as he opened it. And that was the moment everything began to change. He skimmed the first page with the lazy confidence of someone who believed nothing in that room could surprise him. His expression barely shifted until his eyes caught on a heading near the top. Then he stopped turning pages. "What is this?" he asked, finally looking up. "It's documentation," I said evenly. "For a system architecture you've been using for 18 months. He laughed once, short and dismissive. "We own our systems." "You own the implementation," I replied. "Not the method." His smile faded as he flipped the page more carefully this time. Diagrams. Flow sequences. Technical language dense enough that he couldn't bluff his way through it. I watched the color drain from his face as he reached the last page and saw the registration number at the bottom. "You filed this?" he asked. "Yes." "When?" "Before you promoted me to senior without adjusting my contract," I said. "Before you expanded the product into 3 new markets using the same framework. Before the valuation jumped." He leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "You can't do that." "I already did." Silence stretched between us. Outside his glass walls, the office hummed, unaware. He picked up the document again, this time slower, as if hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something less threatening. "This is company work," he said finally. "Built on company time." "It was built on unpaid overtime," I answered. "On personal equipment. And on a concept I developed independently." Legal confirmed that distinction very clearly. His fingers drummed against the desk. "What do you want?" That question told me everything. Not "is this real," not "how do we fix this," but "what will make you go away?" I stood, smoothing my jacket, suddenly aware of how calm I felt. "I want my original salary restored," I said. "Retroactively. I want the equity that was verbally promised and never documented. And I want a licensing agreement for continued use of the framework." "And if I say no?" he asked. I met his eyes. "Then you'll need to stop using it. Immediately." He scoffed. "You think we can't rebuild?" "You can try," I said. "But your entire infrastructure is dependent on it. Pull it out, and the system collapses. You'll miss deadlines. Breach contracts. Trigger audits." He stared at me, calculating. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked uncertain. "You're bluffing," he said quietly. I slid a second paper across the desk. This one was thinner. Simpler. A notice of intent. His eyes scanned it, and his shoulders stiffened. You contacted external counsel? He asked. I contacted several, I replied. And a regulatory consultant. Just to understand my options. The word regulatory hung in the air like smoke. He stood abruptly. Get out, he snapped. I need to make some calls. I didn't argue. I left his office, returned to my desk, and waited. By noon, the tension was visible. Executives whispered in corners. HR representatives walked faster than usual. My boss avoided eye contact. At 2:17 p.m., my badge stopped working. A security guard appeared beside my desk, polite but firm. You'll need to come with me. I packed my bag calmly as coworkers pretended not to watch. The elevator ride down was silent. When the doors opened, the guard handed me a cardboard box containing the few things I'd left behind. I'm sorry, he said softly. I nodded. It's okay. Outside, the air felt different. Lighter. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my lawyer. 2 messages from unknown numbers. And 1 notification that made me stop walking altogether. Emergency board meeting scheduled. External audit initiated. I smiled for the first time that day. By evening, the news broke quietly at first. A line in a financial bulletin. An internal memo leaked. Questions about proprietary technology and licensing rights. Investors asked for clarification. Partners asked for documentation. By nightfall, the number everyone was whispering came out. $5 billion. That was the valuation tied directly to the system they no longer had clear rights to use. The audit wasn't optional. Regulators wanted to know how a core component of a multi-billion-dollar platform had been built, owned, and deployed without proper disclosure. Contracts were frozen. Expansion plans halted. Lawyers flooded the building I'd been escorted out of just hours earlier. My phone rang at 9:43 p.m. It was my boss. I let it ring. The next morning, my lawyer called. They want to talk, she said. They're willing to negotiate. Of course they are, I replied. By the end of the week, the company had signed a licensing agreement on my terms. My salary was reinstated, then tripled under a consulting role. Equity was granted. And a clause was added that ensured my framework could never be altered or replicated without my approval. I never went back to my old desk. 6 months later, the executive team was quietly reshuffled. My boss resigned to pursue other opportunities. The company survived, barely, but it was no longer untouchable. As for me, I work fewer hours now. I choose my projects carefully. And every time someone asks how it feels to be underestimated, I tell them the truth. It hurts, right up until the moment it doesn't. And that moment is worth everything.